Well, it's my very great pleasure indeed to welcome on your behalf this morning a keynote speaker who is no stranger to our diocese, and in particular, no stranger to those of you who have benefited from the formation and training which is on offer at St Hild. The Reverend Dr. Christian Selvaratnam is its Dean of Church Planting and the founder of its Centre for Church Planting. Over the past 20 years, I think I'm right, that Christian has himself led a couple of church plants and continues to supervise and support leaders who have current plants in progress. He is an affiliate professor of Asbury Theological Seminary and the director of studies of its Doctor of Ministry in Church Planting program. And that's a program in which at least five clergy of this diocese either have been or are currently engaged. And for all that I said earlier, that academic learning is a very niche form of learning, and we make a mistake if we try to take that model everywhere into discipleship. Academic study is nevertheless a very good niche. And this particular doctoral program is an especially good niche. And if you have from time to time been wondering about the possibility of furthering your own academic study by doing a doctorate, then can I commend to you this particular program? And if you want to talk to somebody about it, then Justin Dodd is just standing up here in the middle. Justin is still relatively new canon missioner at our cathedral church and is one of the students currently engaged in that program. John Marsh, if he's here, on the balcony waving. Both of them are available if you wish to speak to someone today about what that program offers and involves. Thank you both very much. Christian is the author of a book called The Craft of Church Planting, Exploring the Lost Wisdom of Apprenticeship. And it was published by SEM, I think, in 2022. And that book contains some of the fruit of his own doctoral study. And I am guessing that we're going to receive some of the fruit of that research in the coming moments. Christian lives in York. So he's no stranger to the warmth of a Yorkshire welcome. But we all know that it's in South Yorkshire in the East Riding that warmth is at its greatest. So could I invite you to give Christian a very, very warm Sheffield welcome.
Thanks, Pete. Just checking the timer so you don't get me for too long. It is a great joy to be with you, friends, this morning. You are a fantastic diocese, you really are. And we love working with you at St Hild College. We love our partnership. We love the students that you send to us. Any here? And they love it. And it's not always the case, but we love the way we can work so closely, understanding your needs, desires, your vision, and how we can reflect that in the training that we offer. I did grow up in the East Riding of Yorkshire, so I probably can improve my status a little bit, but live in North Yorkshire. You're very welcome to visit any time that you want to come. The theme of today is this idea of Jesus calling people to follow him. And I want to talk about a craft approach to helping people move forward in discipleship and leadership and mission. A little bit about me. I'm married to Amanda. I've got 3 grown-up children, a cat, a caravan. I proposed to my wife after 17 days of dating. When I used to work with students, they used to say, please don't say that to the students. But it is true. I studied mathematics and theoretical computation at university. It seemed like a good area at the time. Probably explains why I didn't have a girlfriend. I was a free church pastor for 10 years. I worked for Alpha for 15 years and loved seeing, not just in this nation, but globally, the church mobilized. for mission. And as Pete said, I'm a church planter, have been involved in planting and sending out and training others to do that. And I guess the final thing, just say about, just to kind of get a sense of where I'm coming from personally, I think there are three things that really buzz with me, three passions. The first is mission and the strategy of mission in the church, and also to be involved in it personally, the priority of mission. Those that led me to faith at university, that gift is still with me today. I want to extend that to others. I wasn't expecting it, but my life was transformed by meeting Jesus through them. That I also want to see the next generation of leaders in all the areas of the church raised up. And thirdly, this idea of church planting and the renewal of the church through that. For me, what I want to talk about, this topic, is real. It's not theory. It's something I've lived. And so I kind of want to not just talk about this idea of apprenticeship, but if you like, to impart something that I discovered myself as a personal journey as a minister in the church. Near the office where I used to work in the centre of York, I would walk past every day from where I parked my bike two ancient workshops. One was the Minster Glaziers, and the other was the Minster Stoneyard. And at the same time, I was leading a small church, a church plant we'd been sent out to, and we were given a grant of £250, not £1,000, £250. So we were basically a bunch of volunteers. I had a full-time job. I had young children. Everyone on the team was busy. And so we were trying to figure out how can we do this expression of church really well. And I quickly realized as the leader that actually I only have a little bit of time, realistically, to give each week to this. And if I'm the one always leading and always preaching, then that will take all my energy and I'll never be able to invest in anything else. And also, it'll probably get really boring after a few weeks, and they've heard all my stories and they're like, oh, that sermon's come round again. So very, very early on, I was exercised by the need that I needed to find a way to raise up leaders. And one day on a retreat, praying into this, partly in desperation, but partly believing that God would find a way, that often it's in those times when we don't have an abundance of resources, that actually we discover a way that God can open something up for us. The penny kind of dropped that I would have this opportunity to apprentice people, that was kind of what I was already starting to do, to invite people to come along, to learn, to participate, and through that participation, to grow in their discovery of what it meant to follow Jesus and to find the calling that God had given them. And then these ancient workshops that I was walking past, I realized they represent a significant piece of learning and wisdom from the past, our heritage, our inheritance of how training might happen. So I wonder if we could consider for the moment the medieval craft guilds. The guilds existed in our nation and in Europe for about 700 years, from the turn of the first millennium up to the Industrial Revolution. And in the medieval period, and in that period of 700 years, in any town or city, that most people in their working and vocation and living life were affiliated to a guild. The guilds were ubiquitous for training and for trade. Almost every aspect of life in this medieval season was gilded. York, where I live, which would have been quite a small place 700 years ago or 500 years ago, in the 14th century had 125 guilds. And these served distinct areas. They would be the butchers and the bakers and the candlestick makers, but the doctors and the lawyers and the people that sewed and the people that made other things. Each niche area of trade that required people to understand the craft and the way to be involved in that was held in a community called a guild. The local expression would have been probably in someone's house, a master, and their house would be where they lived and where their employees would have lived, and then the front of it might have been the workshop or the place where they sold their wares to others. And the guilds trained people in this idea that we've already heard in apprenticeship methods, and it included practical on-the-job training. It was learning by doing. And it was learning that had in its very essence a creative flair, a creativity to how people learned. And in the guild workshops, people called masters, and we'll come to those in a minute, passed on their knowledge and their skills through direct engagement with apprentices, passing on what they knew from one generation to the next. And so it involved close hands-on training, practical assessment, community learning, and the development of each person as a unique individual. At the best, a guild master was trying to work out, who are you and how can I draw that uniquely and distinctively out of you as a person? And there is a contrast, as we've heard, from modern forms of education, which I also think are fantastic and hold a particular place, and we benefit from them, and I want to invest in them. But there is a significant difference between this inheritance that we have of apprenticeship forms of training, whole life, holistic, skills, knowledge, character, all being received in one experience, and a classroom focus of education, which is often assessed through books and essays, and often can make people who have a real vocation, a brilliant calling, feel like maybe they're not great because they're not great at reading the books or writing the essays. And also it can do the opposite, that sometimes people who love reading the books and are brilliant at writing the essays might not actually be equally good or as good in working with others and in the ministry of the church. And so there is something significant there that I think we need to recover in the culture of the church. Now, actually, theological education is developing, and I hope students at St Hild actually get a much more blended experience. All of them are placed in a church doing significant long-term ongoing work. And so it does sit nicely alongside studies, that in the same week they can be thinking deeply about something and working deeply into something and working out how to put the two together and having the thinking that goes with that enables and causes people to develop. But the Enlightenment, some of our history of where we got to in this season, in a modern era, kind of separated the doing, the trade, the working class, and the intellectual and the study and the scholarly. And I wonder if in this season of the church today, actually there is a coming together of those afresh, recognizing that we need both of those together. And this idea of the craft, the medieval craft guild, a craft, holds both of these beautifully together. Now, the guilds ended with the Industrial Revolution, and there were all sorts of forces. It wasn't just one thing that kind of brought them to an end, but ultimately the industrialization, that technology boom that produced machinery that could work and produce, was the kind of final blow that took away the the trade and the abilities of the guilds. It was a transformation in how people lived and how they worked. Before the Industrial Revolution, everyone was an artisan. Everyone, no matter what you did, was a craft worker. I see glimpses of this every year I go to France, and there are no bakers. There are only artisan bakers, which you know the difference, don't you? Twice the price, and you get a nicer bag. But it's handmade. It's bespoke. It's completely different from down the road. But that was the flavor of the guilds, that people, as they learnt as creatives. And there was an artisan feel and approach to how they were. Whereas we live in an age now that's dominated by more like engineering and a consistency. And there's a lot of good in that. But the work of ministry actually, I think, connects more naturally with art than engineering or science. Now, I should say the guilds were far from perfect. I can only imagine that with our modern insight, some of the inequalities that we are aware of that so easily happen and which we're very attentive to probably were rich in the guilds. There was probably abuse, there was probably unfairness, there was almost certainly bias. And so as we look to them, we have to look very carefully, taking what is good and not taking what isn't good for our age. Not everyone was a fan of the guilds. Adam Smith, the famous economist, wrote about the guilds, and he wrote in one of his books this. He said, "Were you to see two guild masters sat talking at a table, you could be sure one of two things were happening. They were either conspiring to fix prices for their own benefit, or they were conspiring against the welfare of the common man who served them." So the guilds were both beautiful in something they give us about training, but actually they were also a bit like a mafia, a bit like a corrupt trade organization, and industrialization actually did open up some of those things in great ways. Well, as we consider the guilds, I want us to look at 3 stages of training. And I wonder if we could meet 3 people. I asked ChatGTP to draw 3 people from Sheffield Diocese, honestly, and that's what I got. So you can tell me in the lunch break if does this reflect your diocese? Or maybe it found you online and it's reproduced your face on the screen. And in the guild, there were these 3 strong characters that I want us to look at. The first on the left was an apprentice. And in the guild's apprentices were young. Some of them would have been barely teenagers even. They would be people who knew nothing, but they've been called in to find out more about some profession or trade. In the middle is a journeyman. And the name is from the French journée day. And the journeyman is like an intern. They are, in effect, a day worker. So they don't have every skill, but they have enough skill to be someone who could be paid for their work whilst also learning at the same time. And then on the right, we have a master. And of course, in our age, I would want to be really clear. When I say master, I'm thinking of men and women. But in the guilds, masters were typically men. There were other words, but they don't kind of carry over into the modern era as well for us. The word master also carries some ideas to do with authority that we need to be careful of as well. We are receiving that word, I think, as an expert, as an empowerer, as a servant leader. So I wonder if we can think about each of these characters. And as we do it, I would like you to sort of parallel this into church life. Who are these characters in your church or in your chaplaincy work or wherever your ministry is located? What are these people doing? What are the equivalents of these people in the things that you are doing in your ministry? So apprentices are people who are new. Maybe for us, they're new to faith. Maybe they're new to discipleship. Maybe they're new to participation in ministry. And when we think about discipleship, I always think about involvement as well. Years ago, I used to think that the way people were involved in the church is first you would disciple them and get them perfect, and then you would let people do ministry. And then when I started leading churches, I realized it's rarely as tidy as that. And that actually learning on the job as a disciple, learning by being with Jesus, by being with a community of faith, actually means that we are doing and learning as a disciple at the same time. And often one activates the other. It's in doing things that we realize something about ourselves. In learning about ourselves, we realize how we can be better and more effective at ministry. And a key question maybe for each of us is, do you have any apprentices? Is there anyone in your sphere, your family, your social connections, your ministry, where you are purposefully developing them? I've sometimes apprenticed people without telling them I am. I'm just active, proactive in involving them and giving them opportunities. Who are you apprenticing in your work and in your ministry? Who are you training? Who are you training to be like you? Who are you training to pass on what you've received so that they can receive it as well, as Peter explained earlier, thinking about driving? Here's a good question. Who are you training to be better than you? I think the ultimate heart of discipleship and apprenticeship is not that we help people to move forward in their faith, but we actually want them, long for them, because of our help, to actually be able to go beyond us. I think that's the natural instinct of a parent, to be unjealous, to celebrate and to delight that somebody we can invest in does well. Maybe no one apprenticed you in that way, but perhaps you can break the cycle and you can now be one that accelerates the development and the learning of somebody. Who will be your successor? An apprenticeship and working with the apprentice is actually the easiest form of training. It's the most ancient form of training. It begins simply by asking someone to join you. In fact, here's a challenge. Probably most of us are doing something tomorrow. All of us could, today, invite someone tomorrow to be alongside us in some way and thereby activate the beginnings of some apprenticeship. Is there something you're doing tomorrow and you could share a part of it with someone? Even if they do a reading, or even if you just say, would you like to sit with me? Or would you like to travel with me where I go to this place? Whatever it might be. All of us have opportunities to apprentice others because it's the most natural form of training that's available to us. Now let me pick out some things that are fruitful in this form of working with people as an apprentice, of training them in an apprentice way. The first is this, we've already mentioned it, it's participation. The best way for an apprentice to learn is to be invited into the context. This is how a person can learn by copying. The technical term for it is a community of practice, but it simply means saying, hey, would you like to come closer? Would you like to be included in this group that is doing something? Would you, rather than being far off observing, could I make room for you and allow you to be part of it? In Mark's gospel, when Jesus goes up, goes prays, comes down, and he called the disciples, what did he call them to do? To be with him. That's the heart of the apprentice maker, that we call others to. And the process that takes place is called mimetic learning. It just means mimicking. If you've ever spent time with a child, you'll know that's what human beings are naturally wired to do. How many times have I looked around and I'm gardening and then one of the children have got something that isn't a spade, but they're just copying what I'm doing, or my wife's cooking, or I'm cooking, and the children start finding things and doing that, or I'm putting a nail in the wall and they put a nail in the wall, or whatever it might be. We're wired to learn in that sort of holistic, I see you, I copy you approach. And that's apprenticeship taking place. The second is this: support structures. We can help people to train in this way through support structures. And the technical term for this is scaffolding. Scaffolding is like the training wheels on a child's bike. It's the way that you can be riding the bike because you've had some help. The help allows you to learn to ride the bike, and then in time we take the training wheels away because you can ride a bike. It's like a catalyst. Or it's how my wife and I taught all three of our children to swim. We'd do it when we went away in summer camping, usually in France. There'd be a swimming pool, and we had this swimming vest with eight floats that went in. Day one, you throw the child in the, not throw, place responsibly the child in the water with a vest with 8 floats. Oh, Kate, look, you're swimming. Well done, look at you. Olympic standards already. Well done. Day 2, what do? You take a float away. Well done. Oh, Dad, it's hard. No, it's not. Keep going. You're brilliant. That's it. Practice. Oh, you're so good. Day 3, take another float out. Eventually, the child notices, but you say, no, you don't need them. You're so good at swimming. And maybe by the end of the holiday, the child can swim. No floats. They've got their confidence. The floats were just there to temporarily activate the potential that was in them and to accelerate it happening. And scaffolding can be all sorts of things, like the ways in which we help people. If you come to the seminar that I'll do next, I'll talk you through one model that we used for training preachers using scaffolding, how we help them to develop rapidly by putting some support and structure around them, that after a time, they don't need that, and then actually after a time, they can offer that to others. The third is stretching. And again, this has a technical term. It's called the zone of proximal development. But we don't need to worry about that. It's just the idea that we learn when we're stretched. Stretched too much, you're overwhelmed and you might break. Stretched too little, you get bored and you become discouraged. In fact, I have sent out various teams to plant churches, and one team I deliberately sent out, and my reason was not mission, it was leadership development. Because I had a bunch of young leaders, and I knew I need to stretch them or I'll lose them. And so we discerned this would be a good opportunity, and this became their stretch. They were ready to be stretched into it, and they could develop and grow through that. And the fourth is a practical test or challenge. And on screen is a picture of something called an apprenticeship bowl. I actually have one of these, but in my haste to leave the house this morning, I've left it on the kitchen table. My wife probably thinks I'm going to make a trifle when I get home. I'm not going to make a trifle. But I have one of these apprenticeship bowls. The one on the screen is from Waterford Crystal. And in the guilds, the apprentice graduated when they could show evidence that they'd learnt. And it was in the form of what were called pieces. And if you were a carpenter, for example, it might be making a chair. And the chair would demonstrate that you know how to turn the wood, how to shape it, cut it, plane it, how to fit things together, which bit needs to be thin and delicate, which needs to be strong, getting the legs the same height. And you present the chair, and it's evidence that you've completed your understanding, your grasp of these basic skills. And the apprenticeship bowl was one of those. And actually, Waterford still use the bowl as their apprenticeship exam. You can take the exam anytime you want, but it'd be pointless to do it on the first day because you don't know anything. But you can take it whenever you want because it needs to be when you've learnt the skills. And you're given a plain bowl and you're given a week to do the 26 different types of cuts and flutes and sandings and bevels that they need to do in their work as glass makers. And they're allowed to ask for advice from anyone, but no one can touch their bowl. It has to be done with their own hands. And at the end, they present it to the master, and the master decides whether it meets the standard. And it's in the master's interest to be tough, because if it makes the standard, then actually they've passed, and they now join the team as a key worker, as a skilled worker. I wonder what this is for us in church life. What might be the task that we give those that we invest in and we develop? What might be the thing that helps them to grow? For me, that's sometimes been asking someone to run Alpha, or start a small group, or plan some Christmas services. And we've already invested in them, and we've helped them to understand the elements of it. But it becomes their opportunity to put it together and to demonstrate to themselves that actually they've got a grasp of those key skills. The second stage is the journeyman, and again I apply that to women and men. And the guy on the end is called David, and he was a journeyman that I met by chance in York when I was doing my doctorate, and I said, I need to study what you're doing. You are the only journeyman I've ever heard of. And he agreed with his friends to help me with my research at the pub. It cost me £120 to get the data that I needed from them. And actually, the more beer they had, the more they told me their secrets of how they worked. And they told me that actually, and their model follows some of the journeyman period, the journeyman examples. When someone's completed their apprenticeship and they become a journeyman, the idea is that they enter a second phase of learning. They don't know everything, but they do know something, and they know enough to be able to direct their ongoing learning. And the journeymen were also called people on wandering years. And the idea was that they would go off. So I've learned here in this church, I've been shown some of the basics, and I've started my small group, and it's gone really well, and I've trained up a leader, and I've handed it on, and I feel like I've got to that stage, and I'm now ready for the next stretch. And the next stretch in the guild model meant you now need to go somewhere else, a different context, where maybe they do it differently, where the masters there have a different way of explaining it. And in that difference, in that newness, is where you'll actually receive the next stage of learning. And in the guilds, it was also the way that the master stayed up to date. So the stonemason would send their journeymen to France and to Germany and to other parts of Europe, and eventually they would come back and they would demonstrate what they had learned. And that's how the workshop could actually then learn new things and update their skills. Typically, journeymen had to leave. So these guys told me the night before they became a journeyman, they had to make a nail. The master would nail their ear. At that point, I decided I didn't want to do it, as a sign that they were being released from their workshop. The next morning, the master would walk them to the city limits, and they'd stop at the sign, and the other journeyman would come back and gather the other side of the sign. And they had to climb over the sign and then leave with these other journeymen and not look back. And the idea was that they would travel for at least 3 years, moving around from different workshops, different places, maybe for us, different churches, places to learn. And from that, they would pick up new skills, and they would consolidate the next phase of their learning. And if at the end of that period they could demonstrate their new skills, the apprentice had to demonstrate pieces, and the journeyman had to demonstrate a master's piece, which is the origin of that word. And it would be something that demonstrated both their grasp of the basics and the capacity they had to have learnt new things and incorporate them into something they make. It might have been a little cameo stained glass window, or it might have been a set of skills or a particular carving that showed the basics, but also the new things they were taught. And if they could complete that, they could become a master. And then the third stage is the master. Somebody who has completed an apprenticeship, learned more widely, they've shown more evidence of their further learning, and they're now ready to train others. That's not a medieval guy, that's Dave, who works at York Minster. I thought that would be funny, never mind. So the master is a woman or man who's completed an apprenticeship. They've demonstrated their grasp. And the guilds were run like small businesses. So they were like, let's put it in the language here, focal ministers. They were leading a small community that was doing a trade or ministry and that was training and developing people. And the person that was supervising it was somebody that's demonstrated through their own learning and their own ministry that they were ready to be passing that on to others. And masters could call new apprentices, and so the cycle of learning would continue. It would cascade through generations. And the guilds wrote little down, partly because it was an illiterate age, but partly because there was a lot of secrecy. Knowledge was worth something. And so the guild method was a way in which the richness of all the knowledge of that craft and trade could be passed from one generation to the next through this simple process: the apprentices in the workshop, the journeyman traveling around, and now the master teaching others. I want to zoom back and just look at three key dimensions of this training, just so we can ground it in our thinking. So the first is training masters, and I think that's us here. Most of us here have some kind of oversight of something that involves people, and so we're fulfilling that kind of role. I would never use that word of myself, so we're just using it as an idea, but that's the role that we are fulfilling. We are training others through the process of doing some ministry. And one of the things I learned from the guilds is that the master always trained the newest apprentices. I wonder if that's your instinct. We often maybe delegate that away, or we have this idea of a masterclass, which is some elite person training the ones that are nearly at that level. But in the guilds, it was deliberate that the most senior person had to be the one that trained the newest person. They were the ones with the greatest tacit insights and instincts to see. And I learned to do that at G2, the church plant I was leading, with new people. And then I learned to train others so that they could do that well, so that they went beyond just delivering a system, a process, a course, a mechanism. But we did that truly creative thing where we actually saw the person in front of us and perceived how they were. If it was preaching, it might be that I'd say, Dave, you are a natural storyteller, or I love your heart for evangelism, or the gift you have for explaining things, or whatever it might be in any other ministry or activity. And the master particularly has an ability to do that by virtue of their experience. I've seen it when I go to France every year, and so we always do some wine tasting. And if you know anything about wine, the skill, anyone can grow the grapes. The skill is knowing, for some of the wines, when to harvest the grapes. And for some of the wines, the sweet wines, to do it in the afternoon but not the morning and get it wrong is for the wine to be not as good. But here's the skill. If you taste the grape when it's ready, it tastes nothing like the wine that it will be to the untrained palate. I think this is the skill that we develop in ministry. That we can often notice raw potential, that God's grace just beginning to spark in someone, and it's not matured, it's not fully realized, and yet actually it's in the eye of the master, the trainer, to notice that. Some of the people that I've trained that I think have become amazing speakers, but better than me, often their first talks were really poor, and it looked like it didn't work, and yet you can sort of see, I can see what's there. I can see that actually that will mature into something. And so we need to take the next steps and the next steps and the next. The second point is workshops. And churches are workshops, like the guilds. Our churches are places, not just where we give out ministry, but where everyone can be learning. Everyone can be growing. I can think of no better place to learn Christian ministry than a local church on Sunday, or in the prayer meeting, or in the leadership team meeting, or gatherings of the church. It's like you'll know the difference between a hospital and a teaching hospital. In the teaching hospital, you're still getting the medical care, but others are involved because they're in a process of learning, and they can only learn in that context. And so I think that's a vision for our churches, to be workshops of training where others are finding out about how they can serve and how they can be useful. And the final aspect of guild training that came out in my research actually surprised me, which was how important this artistic piece was in training. And as I reflect on where we are as a church in this season where so much is changing, what skill helps us to hold a heritage of wisdom, but in a landscape where the application is changing so much? In my work with church planting, a key word we talk about all the time is contextualization. That no two churches should be the same because they're all planted in different places and people are different in different places. What is the skill that helps us to contextualize? I think it's creativity. I think it's artistry. And so, for example, in college or when I'm teaching, I'm very aware I might not know what the ministry you're going to need to do in 5 years or 10 years will look like. I can't say to you, this is how it is, just copy these steps, this is how it works. But what I can do is to sort of train you to be an artist, to train you how to paint. And then I don't know what picture you will need to paint, but I know you'll have the skills and the abilities to do that. I wonder if we could just watch a short video that I think helps us put this together. If you could watch that now. How are we doing? Okay, cut him now. So that's Pascal, a French jazz improviser. That song that he's playing isn't on music, he's playing it in the moment. He's playing it in the place, it fits the people, it fits that exact time, it fits the building and the ambience. And jazz gives us an interesting way of putting together this idea of creativity. It's still playing. Because how did he come to be able to play that? He didn't just sit down at the piano and think, okay, black and white buttons, I guess you just push them randomly. Is that how you do it? No, that would be awful. In fact, he's got 2 master's degrees in music. He's trained. He's done his scales. He's learned to play other people's music. He's had feedback. He's had tutors that have said, oh, do it a bit more like this. And he's embedded into himself those skills that make it give him an ability to play music. And then he's taken a shift, and he's moved from following the script to writing something new. And it's recognizable as music. It fits. It sounds like an authentic song, and yet it's contextualized to the moment. Is that a picture of how we can think about ministry? How the ancient heritage that we have can rest and abide with the changing and new needs of communities and the places where we need to help people find and discover Jesus. Let me finish with this, and I want to give you two imagined scenarios of people that blend this ancient and modern connection in this idea of jazz. The first is suggested by this idea of jazz. Bruce Benenson says this: in jazz, it is knowing the past that makes the future possible. He goes on, to learn to be a Christian improviser, one must know the entire context, Scripture, and the way in which Scripture has been interpreted in the past. And so if we are those who understand our heritage, all that's been handed to us in the richness of faith and tradition and patterns of doing church, and we're well versed in those, then actually that sets us with the ability to apply creativity and contextualization and find out what it means to do something authentically Christian in this given place, in this given ministry with others. The second idea is, and this is the last thing, is from the guilds. In the guilds, there was one role that was higher than others. It was often not written about, and it often didn't have a name, but sometimes it was called the guild masters. And the guild masters were often recognized as the ones that steered the guild, the network of all those with that particular trade forward in a particular way. And the thing that distinguished someone to be a guild master was not just that they'd been an apprentice and a journeyman and that they'd qualified as a master, but they'd gone one step further forward. And the guild masters were those who understood how to make and repair the tools of their trade. So it might be a woodworker who knows not just how to use the tool to do beautiful work, but also how to make a tool, or how to repair one that isn't functioning in the right way, and to understand the delicacy of that task, and to figure that out, and through that to make the tool to work again. And I wonder if that gives us an idea of a shift that we're seeing in how ministry in the Church of England works today. Is it the case that the pioneers and the church planters and the entrepreneurs and the people that have done the equivalent of this creative thing, people who've started and revitalized churches, now have a particular role in helping us understand how to move the whole church forward? Because they also bring that ever so subtle, tacit knowledge about how we repair, how we make new, and how we craft new things. Amen.
Christian, thank you so much. We're all going to be pondering the ways in which we can apply that very profound but simple model of discipleship development available in that apprenticeship. Thank you. We've got 10 minutes before we break for workshops. No, we've got less than that, 5 minutes. Can I encourage you to turn to those who are around you and just begin that process of pondering how you might be able to apply in your own situation the kind of model that Christian has been articulating. What have you found useful that you can see how you might be able to make use of it in the context where God has called you to be?